Thank you. And I suppose I just want to thank Senator Lynn Ruane for bringing forward this motion. It is absolutely crucial that we do discuss this, and it doesn't get as much time for discussion as it should, as you've just said, Minister, as well. I represent, of course, Minister of the West, as you'd be fully aware, Roscommon and Galway, really rural areas that have a dispersed and sort of rural isolation as well. And I know Senator Ruane spoke about her own background. Like my background, I suppose I was the first person in my family to go to college. I suppose my background is that it was a small farm. Both my parents worked part-time jobs on top of that, and it, it was always, the pin of your collar type thing. It always was. And there are so many families that do struggle in that way. But I suppose the challenges that we may have faced, in my parents' generation, 40 or 50 years ago, was that there was that valve for immigration or for leaving the country, to better your prospects. But now in Ireland, I suppose, to be here as a representative for me is absolutely astonishing. To see maybe from where my grandparents were in their lives and how they maybe struggled to have a family, to bring a family up and to have children who survived infant mortality, and to see my own parents as well, and to see the country that Ireland has become today. When you think of the poverty in the 50s and 60s, and not to take away from what we're dealing with right now, but I suppose I look back to that period and I just realised that the country has changed. And as a democracy, it's something that we have to still strive for, to make sure that we can reach, even better stats that we look at and how we evaluate ourselves. In my town of Ballinasloe, Minister, and you were very good, you visited Ballinasloe earlier this year in your role. I suppose you visited Galway Rural Development, and that would lead out in the SICAP programme. I mean, that's on social inclusion and community activation. Minister, we spoke, and I had an opportunity to speak with you in the room that day, and I highlighted that Ballinasloe as a town has very high levels of challenges, particularly on the public deprivation index. It ranks very highly, along with many probably city centre areas here. And again, when we look at the deep-natured sort of structure of poverty, it's generational sometimes in some of these families. It can be generational, and it can be a real challenge about how we break that cycle. But also, I suppose, Minister, when I spoke with you, it was about how there are certain supports that are needed. And you spoke about that SICAP, which is funded, I know, through the LEADER programme, through the Department of Rural and Community Development, but also around, say, the Family Resource Centre. We need a family resource centre. I mean, we speak about maybe the portion, the segments of our population that are really vulnerable. Of course, it's single parents, it's single mothers, it's young children, potentially with single mums. And people from a travelling background and people with disabilities. But Minister, we need to have those supports such as a family resource centre in these areas that we've identified. And you talked about empowering communities. County Galway is one of the 14 areas that you've looked at. I don't know if you have the detail of what in those areas in County Galway have been looked at. And I suppose the other question I'd have, Minister, if you get time to come in again, is around the census. Obviously, the public deprivation index is focused and getting so much of its concrete data from the last census, which was 2016. I know it's going to take time, but when are we going to see the sort of outcomes of the census, the last census? Also I listened to Senator Lynn Boylan, who talked about not having statistics, but actually I feel we do have statistics. I feel our census is a key measure for us in terms of gathering information about our country and about the measures and policies we need to put in place. The challenges we have in the West sometimes comes down to when we want to put measures in place, services and amenities, it comes down to population. That's the challenge we have, is that we have people who are struggling, but if you don't have enough people, if you're not in the million bracket or the 500,000 bracket, how do you get those services? In Ballinasloe, we also have the DEIS, Delivering Quality of Opportunity, Level 1, and also a secondary school in the area. The only secondary school in County Galway was in Ballinasloe that was added to the DEIS programme. But across the country, we now have 1 in 4 schools that are now accessing supports under DEIS. I suppose we always need to judge a country, as is always mentioned, by looking at the most vulnerable, and that is so true. I very, very much agree with that. That is a measure we should always use. And we have to fight, and I believe that in Fine Gael it is about fighting for a fair society that's equal to all, where you have opportunity. But we have to look at those disadvantaged areas and access to supports. From my perspective, if I may, I'm spokesperson on education, but for me, education, it's around young children and supporting those young children from maybe disadvantaged areas. You know, very important that we see the free books, primary schools, I suppose, but also the school's summer programme. It was just announced yesterday. That's 10 million that's been allocated for people from, particularly children from educational disadvantage. Those 2 weeks, we need to see more schools doing that. We see, I think, 25% of our schools, primary and secondary, that are rolling out that programme. It's only in the last number of years, but we need to see more schools doing that to ensure that those children, be it from literacy or numeracy, they can get added supports and that additional 2-week focus. And it doesn't need to be the principals and the teachers. You know, you can also bring in students from, student teachers and different therapies, nursing, healthcare that could come in and deliver that programme. But we need to see more of that programme being rolled out. Something else I would just mention as well is just the apprenticeships, the importance of earning and learning. It's very expensive, maybe, and maybe it puts young people on the back foot and Leaving Cert saying they can't get a qualification, but there's opportunities for young people to get qualifications as well through a lot of our apprenticeships, and it's been broadened out to so many areas, not just our traditional trades and crafts, but just ways for young people to see that they can reach their career of choice and where they want to go through other opportunities as well. Just around childcare, I suppose, supports for single mums. You've mentioned the working family payment, and Minister, if I can confirm, I believe that's 19 hours over 2 weeks if a young parent is working. There's also the universal childcare scheme. You know, we have to look at measures, you know, as well as obviously, you know, a minimum living wage, we have to look at measures that support the costs that families face, and particularly, I suppose I'm really focusing here on single parents and single mums. Obviously the GP visit card, and obviously if you've access to the medical card, but the GP visit card next April is going to be for those under the median income. And again, just, you know, that median income, how is that going to be evaluated? I mean, we maybe have a rough idea at the moment, is it in the mid-30s, but what is that median income potentially, how is that going to be evaluated in April of next year? Older people, of course, is a big area for me. In the region of Roscommon, Galway, you have a high proportion, according to the last census, of people over 66. And again, the things I talk about when I go knocking on doors is fuel allowance, you know, that you're not afraid to turn on the heat, that you're not afraid to put the heat on. You know, come January of next year, they're going to widen the sort of eligibility criteria for people over 70. You know, that is something that we have to make sure that they're looking at an additional, is it 60 to 80,000 families that will come in under that, and that's under the Department of Social Protection. Just around healthcare, and Senator Ruan, I think, mentioned just around the addiction side, and I would totally agree. Sometimes we're facing, and apologies, I'll finish up on this point, but just that we're facing an awful lot around drug addiction and alcohol addiction. And we see it, and I know it's been mentioned in our city centres. This is also a huge issue. I know, like in our own hospitals, like Portiuncula and Roscommon, that this is a big challenge. So, Minister, I suppose supports through healthcare around alcohol supports, we need to see that in our towns. Thanks.